everybody, and welcome back to the Empowered Self podcast with me, Krystal Long. And wherever this episode finds you today, whether you're out on a walk, on the commute to and from work, or taking a quiet moment to yourself, I'm really glad you've tuned in. Today's conversation is a special one for me because I'm joined by someone whose work I've admired for a long time now, and that person is James Sweetman. James is a well-respected executive and life coach, trainer, speaker, and author with a career spanning more than 2 decades. Before moving fully into coaching, James held senior roles in blue-chip companies in areas such as change management, business development, customer services, before leaving corporate life behind to pursue what he describes as his true calling, helping others to thrive. James is a certified NLP Master Practitioner, holds a diploma in business and personal coaching, and since founding his own coaching practice in 2004. James has worked with thousands of clients, helping them lead with greater clarity and confidence. He is also the author of several books, including my personal favourite, Soar, Powerful Questions That Will Transform Your Life. And James is also the host of Your Time with James Sweetman podcast. What I've always appreciated about James is the way he brings together wisdom, humour, warmth, authenticity, and a genuinely generous heart in the work that he does. I personally first met James in person myself in a conference here in Cork back in 2017, which is about 9 years now, and I followed and appreciated James's work ever since. I've also attended 4 of the SOAR workshops since 2018, including the most recent one online in 26 in January, as it feels especially meaningful to have him here on the podcast today. In this episode, we're exploring heart-based goals, the difference between achievement and fulfillment, the connection between pressure and presence, and some very practical ways of supporting our well-being in everyday life. So if you've ever found yourself chasing goals that looked right on paper but didn't quite feel true inside, or if you've been craving more alignment, self-trust and authenticity in how you live and work, I think this conversation will truly resonate with you. So James Sweetman, you are very welcome to the Empowered Self podcast. How are you today?
Oh, thank you, Krystal, and thank you for those very kind words. I can't believe it was back in 2017 when we met at that event in Cork. I think it was at the International Hotel. Time goes by for sure, and I'm very appreciative of your support over the years, and also for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm delighted to contribute.
And James, I'm delighted to have you on, and it's really special for me to have you here, and thank you so much for joining me. And I am very delighted to have this conversation with you. As I said earlier, I followed your work for a long time now, even prior to us meeting in 2017. And the things I always notice is the way you speak about, I suppose, growth, change, self-leadership in a way that feels spacious and grounded rather than pushy or performative.
Yes.
So maybe to begin, for listeners meeting you for the first time, could you share just a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do? And I know I said...
Sure. As you had said, gosh, when I think about it, it was January 2004 when I made the leap into setting up my own coaching and training business. So it's hard to believe that's 22 years ago now. And before that, I'd worked in financial services. And that was only for 12 years. So that's half of that time. And over the last 20 or so odd years, I've thoroughly enjoyed everything that I've done, but it kept growing and changing and evolving because I just think how much the world has changed in the last 2 decades. Social media and YouTube, podcasts didn't exist back then, I don't think, Krystal. But I suppose I'm blessed in that what I do is an extension of who I am. I often say, even if I won the lotto and went off and had a splurge and did a round the world trip or, whatever, I'd still eventually be spending my time doing something very similar to what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And that's a very blessed situation to be in. If we look at the practical side of things, my work can be split into a few different areas. So a good chunk of my work would be one-to-one coaching. And that's always been the foundation, I suppose, of what I do. And over the years, that has fine-tuned a little. So what I tend to find is that a chunk of the people that I work with would be professional people who maybe have, 15, 20, 30 years experience behind them, who have maybe climbed the career ladder, but are looking for greater levels of fulfillment. So you had mentioned that distinction between achievement and fulfillment. That's front and center with a lot of the work I do with a sizable proportion of my one-to-one clients. There is a side piece to some of that work, which again evolved probably from about 07 or 08, which is interview skills coaching. So that's a very different, well, that's different, but it's much more contained in that I assist people, helping them to prepare for a job interview. And again, they tend to be professional people who are looking for a role that is more aligned with really who they are at this stage in their life, rather than maybe what society tells them what's expected of them type of thing. There's other pieces to my work, things like, I deliver workshops on topics like leadership, emotional intelligence, presentation skills, personal branding, a lot of what I call the Oprah stuff, the touchy-feely stuff. And then, of course, as we connected, I speak at conferences and events, usually on similar topics, because I know where I sort of know what my lane is. I often say I work at the junction between business, personal leadership, motivation, and spirituality, which is quite a unique combination when you bring the four of them together. But they're how would I say it? They're the four drivers of what lights me up, and therefore, by extension, it's perhaps what makes me unique in what I'm offering the people who work with me. And then, of course, there's the media production side of things, the YouTube channel and the podcast and the blog writing and all of that stuff too. So there you go. That keeps me busy.
Yeah, and you do keep busy, and they're all stuff, as you say, that are aligned with who you are.
Yeah.
Well, and what you offer other people as well. And I suppose maybe that question of what we're really searching for brings us naturally into today's conversation, because sometimes the goals we think we should be chasing are not always the ones that are fully, truly aligned.
Yes.
Goals. I know that will be a new idea for some listeners. So maybe that's a lovely place to be.
Yeah, I think for a long time now, for myself, as someone who started to set goals when they were around 14 or 15, Krystal, and that's not today nor yesterday, and they were sort of aligned with New Year resolutions and that sort of thing. Before I ever heard of the term personal development or coaching, I was setting goals. It might have been to get certain exam results in the Leaving Cert, but they worked for me until they didn't. After a while, it felt a little bit laborious. And I found it was the same with a lot of people I was working with. You're sort of, smart goals. You were throwing your eyes to heaven and shrugging your shoulders. It was almost like being there, done that. Having said that, they still serve a purpose. So for people who are not familiar with what SMART goals are, it's an acronym. So the S is for specific. In recent times, I've sometimes changed that to a stretch. It's like as a stretch goal, something that pulls you a little. M is for measurable. A is achievable. R is relevant or realistic. And then T is time bound or time boxed. And they serve a purpose. I'm still using SMART goals in one area of my life, Krystal, and that's in terms of fitness and physical well-being. Whereas I go to a gym and I do yoga and various other things, but I've set a goal almost a year ago around some weight loss and energy levels. And I was able to work the SMART goal structure around that because everything was within my control. I think that's one of the assumptions behind SMART goals is that you're able to chip away, progress in a direction, have milestones of success, and then reach your end goal over a period of time where all of that is within your control. But there is so much that is not within our control. So therefore, SMART goals can set us up for disappointment. We're doing our best, but we're still not achieving what we would hope to achieve because we don't have agency over it all. So they still have a purpose, but what I have found, and it's probably aligned with how my own with my own self-awareness and my own personal development, and then mirrored with clients that I'm working with too, is that we were looking for something that is more meaningful, that maybe is more aligned with fulfillment than it is with achievement. Fulfillment, for example, is like enjoying the process of mountain climbing. You're enjoying climbing the mountain. You enjoy the process, the steps, the actions, as opposed to achievement, which is striving until you arrive and you get the momentary high and then you're looking for the next mountain. And as I say, for me in particular, I want something that's more sustainable and it's more aligned with how we live every day, as opposed to something that is almost like an appendix, like where the goal is an appendix to what we're doing rather than how we're living every day. So the heart, of course, is lovely because for most of us, our journey, our own personal journeys, and maybe society's journey is from the head to the heart anyway. So it's nice that heart is the acronym, HEART. So if we look at what each one of those stand for, it helps us break it down. So H is for in harmony with our values. I mean, I even just love the word harmony when you think about it. Harmony is lovely. In harmony with our values. That presupposes, Krystal, that we have an idea as to what our values are. Now, values in this context are those qualities, those traits that are important to us. So anyone who has done anything in the area of coaching or NLP, the word values will drip off their tongue, that we know what we're talking about. But for people tuning in, values for me are like the ingredients in the cake of fulfillment. We all want to feel fulfilled at what we do. We all want, say, career satisfaction or quality relationships. We all ultimately want the same thing, but our values will be the different ingredients that will, how would I say it, nourish us along the way. And one of the ways of identifying our values is just looking at different areas of our lives and asking ourselves, well, what's important to me about? So what's important to me about my working life? What's important to me about my relationships? What's important to me about my health and fitness? When you ponder that question, your response to them will be identifying or bringing into consciousness your own values. I'm probably aware that I'm rabbiting on here, Chris.
No,
you would know
I'm just soaking it all in.
You would know I speak for a living, as long as I'm making sense. But that's the H, in harmony with values. The E in the heart model is for energizing. And again, it's a lovely word, energizing, when we think about it. What we're working towards should energize us, not deplete us. Yeah. If I'm thinking of something that I'm working to achieve or want to create or do, ideally I want to have a sense of energy attached to it. So it sort of builds on itself. It excites me to maybe put some effort into it, but I get the reward of it in that it also energizes me. The practice of doing it also energizes me. So it's cyclical in that regard. So that's the H for in harmony with values. Energizing, where it fuels me rather than drains me. And then the A in the heart model is for in alignment, which is a word I've used earlier. And that can have two interpretations. One, the heart goal should align with other aspects of our lives. So if I have a heart goal that's in relation to my work, well, it shouldn't be at the cost of depleting other areas of my life. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game. So does this blend into the holistic view I have of myself and my life? And then is it in alignment within myself, sort of head, heart, gut?
Yes.
Does it feel right on the inside? And we can sort of have that calibration ourselves. Earlier, when I was mentioning, how my business has branched off in different directions, whether it's the membership community, whether it's different books, whether it's the podcast, whether it's my podcast, which is currently on hold for a bit, all of those decisions are made from a place of what feels aligned to me on the inside, where I'm paying attention to how I feel, which is probably one of the themes of everything we speak about, particularly if we look at some wellbeing stuff later.
Absolutely.
It's paying some attention to our emotional selves, not just our rational, logical selves. Because as I always say, behind it all, we're emotional beings anyway. So we've got harmony with values, we've got energizing, we've got that sense of alignment. Does it work different aspects of my life, or does it feel right on the inside? The R can be for resonant, which is similar to that sense of alignment, but it's also realistic. We live in the real world, Krystal. So, there has to be an element of realism to it.
We try to.
Yeah. But if we look at the R for resonance, though, as well, what I like with that sense of it brings it into almost, does it feel precious to me? If I'm working towards something, it's based on values, it feels important to me. But there's almost like it's personal and it's precious. I want to look after it.
It's just for you, kind of.
It's just for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings a sense of meaning with it too. And then the T within the heart model is thrilling. And I love the word thrilling because it denotes excitement, but it also denotes being on the edge of comfort zone, where if you think of something as thrilling, there's almost like a little bit of nervousness in there. There's a little bit of fear maybe in there. Think of a thrilling roller coaster ride or something. Yeah. There's adrenaline, exactly. And that is often an indication that, you're growing. If you're at the edge of comfort zone, there's a sense of
yeah.
Your heart's beating fast. And I like that as well when we think about heart-based goals, because there is an energy to it and there's a sense of growth to it as well. It's not just, how would I say it? It's not taking the easy path the whole time. You're still there contributing and producing, but in a way that feels much more personal, precious, aligned, energizing. And when I started, I shared that heart model first with my membership community last September, because of course September is like the new January when it comes to goal setting and that. And it really resonated with people. And I found that, I would say, a lot of people that I work with, they sort of know themselves. They tend to be mature people, but they also were looking for something that gave them some language or tools and almost permission to listen to themselves a little bit more. Because if we think of maybe a lot of traditional goal setting, which, as I say, still has its place, it can be the old strive to arrive model, and the sacrifice is the reduction in well-being. Whereas what I think with the heart-based goals do, it doesn't ignore the well-being side of it, because you're looking at energy and you're looking at values.
No, and just that last bit you said about, the goals in terms of the SMART goals are the output, they're the achieving. What I like about the heart goals is that there's more fulfillment, and it's bringing a sense of alignment into your life as well. And it's also about the well-being part of it, because I feel like when you're congruent with yourself, when you're in alignment, that the well-being kind of almost becomes more into focus.
Yes. It's not. Yeah, it's part of how we're showing up. Like it's in the equation. It's not. Say an older model of work, strive until you arrive, feel exhausted, then have to replenish. That is the roller coaster when you think about it. And it's not that we're looking for a flat line either. I often say that's like flat line and Krystal. We don't want that. That's boredom. How I often view it, and some people would use the phrase here, a bit like, better work-life balance or productivity versus well-being balance. But what we tend to forget with balance is not static, it's fluid. And in recent times, instead of the word balance, I've been using the term or the imagery of currents, as in, like in a river or in a sea, different currents, there's different flow. Because you would know, when you have times when you're energized and excited and it's fueling your values and you're putting hours into work, let's say, and you might go home after the end of a long work day, but you still feel invigorated by it. You're still energized by it because you are riding the current that day. There might be other days where we're pushing against the current, or as Abraham Hicks would say, we're swimming upstream a little bit. And that's fine. That's what life is once we can recognize it. Whereas balance can balance can denote something is static. There's certain allocation of time and energy for this and for that. But I think we're too complex as people for that. So for and as simplistic as that, what I like to do is say, what current is there? So for example, I went back to college when was it 22 to do a master's in creative writing, loved it, sort of parked it afterwards. But I found sort of the bubbling up of that coming back again since Christmas. And it's like I'm riding the current of that now a little bit more.
Yeah.
Krystal. And it's like I'm putting a bit more time and energy into that now because it ticks many boxes for me. It fulfills many values for me. Whereas it wasn't on the radar last year, and that was fine. So maybe that's something that people can resonate with as well when it comes to work-life balance, or that interaction between productivity and well-being, viewed as currents, and they won't be static. I won't go into the analogy of sometimes there can be tidal waves and whirlpools and all of that, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do indeed. And, one of the lines as well, James, that stuck out in your work for me is the sense that the heart wants to feel can be a better motivator than what the head or the ego wants to be.
Yes.
There's so much in that. And could you say a little more about the
Sure.
distinction between a goal that comes from the heart and one that comes from pressure, expectation, comparison, or even ego?
Yeah. I think it goes back to something I maybe alluded to earlier, that as human beings, we are emotional beings. So ultimately behind everything that we're seeking, if you label that a goal, an ambition, a dream, whatever, after everything we're seeking is ultimately a request to feel more of a positive emotion. So if you drill it down, why do I want to go to, I don't know, the south of France on my holidays? If you keep asking the why question, as Simon Sinek would say, eventually you will get to more of a positive emotion. Greater sense of freedom, or more excitement, more love, whatever it is. And what heart-based goals, I think, help us with is to get to that emotion sooner. It's like, let me bring that front and center rather than it being the byproduct. And also, if we think about motivations in a slightly broader way, motivation is either towards something positive or away from something negative. So it's the carrot and stick. It's towards something positive or it's away from consequences. And at different times, we'll be motivated by different combinations of those things. So, for example, if I go back to my health and fitness one, I'm motivated towards being able to put on certain shirts and then buttoning again, that sort of thing. I'm motivated away from feeling sluggish.
Yeah.
There's also intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, So intrinsic, does it come from the inside? And of course, heart-based goals all come from the inside. So
Sure.
It's the inside out, it's what's important for me. As opposed to extrinsic goals come from the outside in, which is the comparison stuff, which brings us into the area of ego and all of that. And of course, we have to engage with the world. We're part of the world. We make assessments of what's going on around us. But again, I would bring it back to ultimately the test is, how does it make me feel? How does it make me feel? Is it thrilling? Is it energizing? Is it in harmony with my values? Does this feel aligned? Is it resonant?
Yeah.
Very rarely will externally imposed, extrinsic, consequent, away from goals feel any of them.
Yeah. And for myself, when I was reflecting on this conversation myself and back on the SOAR workshop in January, I realised for me, my own heart goal this year isn't really one with a fixed outcome.
Yes.
It's more about how I want to live and work, that fulfillment piece. So for me, I want my coaching, facilitation, podcast, other things that I do to come from a place of presence.
Yes.
Trust, authenticity, and let those things be expressions of who I am rather than things I feel pressurized to prove. So I'm curious when someone begins to realize that their goals have become more about performance or validation. How do they begin to come back to themselves?
I think it's great awareness to be able to voice that as you voiced it, Krystal. That's more than half the battle. I would always emphasize, and I always say this to groups and people I work with, we all show up and we all do our best. Some days our best will be different than others. And sometimes our definition of best can broaden and deepen. Also, if I'm becoming aware of the distinction between, say, the extrinsic goals and what feels more meaningful to me, that is wonderful self-awareness to have, because when it's in awareness, you can then make choices. And if we feel we have more choices, we feel more in control, at least of ourselves, and self-leadership, agency over yourself, etc. Also to recognize too that, we're all perfectly ourselves, but we're also at the same time works in progress, which is a little bit of a paradox, I suppose. But we always continue to grow and evolve. And getting that piece of awareness is just another aspect of that evolvement, Krystal. But as you were speaking there was another question that came to mind. And there's one that it's been very meaningful in my life. And I think it aligns with what you were voicing about your focus for this year, let's say.
Yeah.
So often unconsciously, we set goals and targets and ambitions and whatever, and we're doing it as a way to prove our worthiness. If we turn it around, though, and operate from a place of, can I work on accepting my own worthiness first? And then let me, from that place, create, do, be, give, experience. So I'm not doing it to prove my worthiness. I'm doing it as a demonstration of my worthiness.
Okay. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. That can be a game changer. Going back to what you were voicing there, my own area of focus this year is similar to yours, but I had found, say, in the last 6 months of last year, that I felt quite out of balance in a few areas. So my theme for this year myself is rebalancing. Back into a sense of alignment. And that rebalancing, for most of us, and I'd say for most people listening into this podcast, is there will be areas where we've probably overgiven, like we've probably done too much. That will drain our energy and drain our spirit. And again, wonderful to be a giver, wonderful to be of service to others. For me personally, I'm just looking to rebalance that a little more.
Yes. Yeah.
So that it feels more grounded, or it feels more, it's being of service to me as it is being of service to other people. It's the old adage of, what's it, feed people from the saucer, because your own cup is full and then you're giving from what the overspill is.
Yeah.
As opposed to depletion, which ultimately serves no one.
It doesn't. And for me, I've burnt out before Christmas as well, trying to give in other areas, neglecting myself in other areas. For me as well, like, when I think of the heart goals, there's alignment there with the nervous system, fits right in with the heart goals as well.
Yes.
Maybe that's part of the invitation here too, not just asking what do I want, but from that state, am I making this decision? So what state am I in making those decisions?
Yes. Yeah. Again, if, when I'm working one-to-one with people, we often have a flip chart, and I'll often draw a diagonal line on it. And this will indicate an emotional scale. So it sort of plots emotions that we have habits of feeling. And we all feel emotions all the time, because we're human. That's who we are. And I often say below the line, emotions, the heavier ones, the weightier ones, frustration, worry, anxiousness, things we'll all feel, because that's part of being human.
Of course.
If we're in those states or moods, it's very difficult to identify goals, dreams, ambitions. It's very difficult to connect with our sense of creativity, very difficult to reach for what's energizing or thrilling. So sometimes our first role is to get ourselves into a state where I'm feeling at least neutral, if not positive. But to know that that's part of the game of life as well, it's the yin yang, for every hot there's a cold, for every up there's a down. For feeling confident, we have to know what lack of confidence is, or, for excitement, there has to be, nervousness. There's always that polarity with it. How do I work on climbing the emotional scale? And that brings us back to, how do I want to feel? So as bizarre as it sounds, so many people I work with, myself included, are world class, Krystal, when it comes to having to-do lists and being organized and being productive. World class with them.
Yeah.
And we're not throwing that away. That's a great skill. But can I supplement my to-do list with sometimes a not to-do list? That can help. This week I am not A, B, C, D, and E. But maybe on top of that, you have a to-be list. And so this week, I'm just paying a little bit more attention to how do I want to feel. And if I'm aware of that as my bullseye, how can I connect with that as simply and as frequently as possible? Not laborious, circuitous rules where all of this has to be done and achieved in a certain way. And then I can feel that. Can I bring that in first? And of course, we could take all that off into the area of the secret and manifestation, because that's also how that works when you think about it. But that's probably a chat for another day.
Yeah, certainly is, and certainly interesting topic as well. But just kind of back to the well-being. I know the word well-being gets thrown around a lot like a buzzword, and I know we spoke before about the word resilience.
Yes.
And things like that. So what supports well-being most consistently?
Yeah, I think for everyone will discover what works for them. For me, well-being really has two components. One, we're back to, well, how am I feeling? It's like my mood. I usually have two warning signals for when I've drifted away from well-being. And that's part of life, Krystal, as well. It happens. One is that I will tend to feel and be irritable because I know that's not my natural state. So if that's bubbling away, it's communicating something. Emotions are always trying to communicate something to us. Then I also have the awareness that if something that I normally really enjoy and it lights me up, let's say writing or creating, it lights me up. If that's not motivating me, I'm depleted. Yeah. So something that I normally love and enjoy and it fuels me and it ain't working, or I'm not bothered to spend a bit of time in it, it means I'm sort of out of alignment as well. So they would be my warning signals. But it's interesting you mentioned the word resilience, because in recent times I've been I love my acronyms and phrases and stuff that gives us maybe handrails. And when it comes to well-being, there's 4 R's, the letter R, that I find helps me. And they mightn't be what you think they are, Krystal, but I'll share them anyway and see what resonates. Another R word, see what resonates. The first one is relationships. And I know for me as an introvert, although you may not tell some of the time, but I am an introvert. And one of the definitions of being an introvert is that you fuel yourself in your own company, whereas big crowds can drain you. But too much of anything is not so good. And what I have found for myself, one of the key ingredients in my own personal well-being is quality relationships, or relying on relationships, because we all have that desire to connect and belong. And it's often one that's left or ignored or not considered when we're feeling burnt out or tired. It sits in with the old adages of a problem shared is a problem, halved. Sometimes in conversation with someone else, you can get a different perspective on the situation you're dealing with. You can feel listened to and heard and understood. So bizarrely, that is top of my list when it comes to well-being, is being attentive to relationships. Yeah. And you can probably, we're also talking about the relationship to yourself as well, and being your own best friend and that sort of thing. But here primarily, I am looking at it in terms of the connections we have to others, which are like our buttresses when it comes to our own well-being. Because we are all emotional beings and we're all connected and we're all one if we go that deep with it. So that's the first R, relationships. The second one, we can call it rest, we can call it restoration, we can call it renewal. the rituals and the routines. I think there's 5 or 6 or words altogether that we have in that area. And for me, very simply, because I often think it's nice to have a menu of options when it comes to ways that we look after ourselves. But very simply, mine comes down to the rhyming phrase of less screen, more green.
Oh, I like that.
If you think of the screens that we spend our time looking at every day, more green. And of course, it can be green smoothies or whatever, but primarily it's being out in nature. Yeah, it's being out in nature. For me, that's the umbrella heading when it comes to my own rituals and routines. Less screen, more green. Because I know from experience that if I'm spending too much time on screens, I'm depleting my energy, irrespective of what I'm looking at. And God forbid if it's news and stuff like that, I'll stay informed, but it's mindfulness around what we're consuming. And I know for me, there's a correlation between screen time and lack of well-being. So what have we got with the R's? Relationships, the rest, renewal, routines, menus that we have, etc. And of course, there is so many different types of rest that we need. Physical rest is just one of them. Another R, which again we mightn't think of straight away, but we touched on it earlier, is receiving. Oh. So many of us, and it touches on what you were saying there earlier. I was saying, where we'll give, and that's wonderful. And maybe giving was role modeled for us when we were younger. We were brought up by givers. Receiving was rarely role modeled for us, so we don't know how to do it. And I know for me, one of the areas that I've had to work on is being open to receiving, whether it's help, support, abundance. Yeah. Because one of the hidden things within receiving that maybe we're not aware of, as givers, we are still in control. We're in control of our giving. Receiving requires a diminishment of control. That's a deep one.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking of an old saying that I would have grown up with, that it's nicer to give than to receive.
Yeah. But if everyone was doing that, no one is receiving to allow others the benefit of giving. So this is about coming back into balance. The way I view it, Krystal, is think of it like the cycle of breath. If it's all giving without receiving, it's all exhaling without inhaling. Ask and you shall receive. We're good at asking. We're not so good at receiving. Asking, of course, goes back to the goals and everything like that. We're good at the giving, not so good with the receiving. This is not giving. This is just bringing it back into balance. And usually when we're burnt out, we haven't been so good at receiving.
Yeah, because usually that's kind of at the cost of giving to others and to things that we are to receiving for ourselves.
Yeah. And interestingly, I have a question. I collect questions, as you know. You were kind enough to mention my book, Soar, which is about 15 years old now, bizarrely. And I love questions, but there's a great question I came across recently, which was something like, what do I need to give myself permission to ask for that I wouldn't normally be comfortable receiving? That'll get me to the edge of comfort zone again. So it's just bringing that, how would I say it, the awareness of receiving as a balancing component within my well-being into fruition. We have recognizes that we live in the real world and we're going to have pressures and stresses, and the unforeseen will happen. Events happening around us that are a little bit chaotic, and our habit can be to react to them. But ideally, what we're looking to do is to choose our response to them. So this is like the old Viktor Frankl bit, the wider the gap between stimulus and response, the more agency we have, the more freedom we have. But that's something that I've been working on myself as well, is, when the stresses and the pressures arise, we'll often revert to what we have automatically or habitually done. Can I choose something else? Can I choose to take a breath? Can I predict what might happen and then choose an alternative approach to that? Because the old adage, if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always gotten. But oftentimes we think with well-being, oh, everything will be sorted and I'll be just floating around on my lotus leaf. That will never happen. There's always going to be the external stresses and stimuli. So part of the work of well-being is identifying the triggers, but then also identifying ways that I could respond differently, as opposed to just reacting the way I've always reacted. And that's easier said than done, because we do just react, particularly when it's something that has triggered us or something that we deem as a threat, physical or psychological. Because behind, how would I say it, that sense of well-being is also feeling psychologically safe.
Yes.
And having awareness around that helps. That's why one of the things that I often go to when I do feel stressed or pressurized or events are happening that are outside of my control, we take a few breaths, because the breath is our friend. The breath is always with us. And can I say to myself, well, right now I'm safe. Right now I'm safe. In this moment, I'm safe. That allows the parasympathetic nervous system to come forward or to activate a little. And for me, that's the triage piece of well-being. Am I safe? Straight to it. And because usually in that moment you are. And it also gets us to distinguish between what's real and what's just a movie in our heads. Because a lot of the time, good old imagination, which fuels our creativity, is also running nightmare scenarios in our head, which doesn't exist outside of our head. So right now, am I safe? Yeah, The answer is yes.
So with that, James, when you're feeling safe, what role do boundaries play in that as well?
Yeah, boundaries for me always comes back to, Krystal, what will I tolerate and what will I not tolerate? And interestingly, I did a piece not too long ago on the topic of authenticity, particularly in the area of leadership. So, the way we get the phrase authentic leadership, and boundaries come into that as well, but not in a way, not in an obvious way. So most of us, would think, I want to show up and be aligned and be authentic. And that's wonderful. But there's a lot of misconceptions around that. For me, with authenticity and boundaries, it's not forgetting the fact that in every situation we're in or every context we're in, it still requires adaptation and discernment. So like who we are in one environment may not be the same as who we are in another environment. And that is not being inauthentic in one and authentic in another. It's just being flexible, it's being adaptable, and it's using our own judgment. And those different environments will have different tolerances for us. But I think ultimately it comes back to, I can be adaptable and I can be flexible, but not to the point where I'm sacrificing myself to make other people feel good. That's when I know I've gone too far.
Whereas the link to self-compassion, the role of self-compassion in there as well would be very important.
Yeah. Again, back to the balance piece, because most of us will be very compassionate and kind towards others. We just want to make sure it's equally applied to ourselves. That's why sometimes, if we're in a situation, a great question can be, what advice or how would a good friend of yours support you or help you in that scenario? That perspective will often give us a clue to the compassion we are not giving ourselves.
And I suppose what signs might show up in the body, mind, or the behavior in people when they're out of alignment with their well-being?
Again, for me, I can only speak to my own experience. I would go back to what I had mentioned earlier. What motivated me normally doesn't motivate me, and I'm irritable. Now, we can have off days, but if that irritability lasts a period of time, it's a clue to me that I'm exhausted. I've overgiven. I've over something. I've overthought. I've overdone. I've drifted to perfectionism, because too much of anything is not so good.
No. And I think a phrase that I suppose keeps coming up for me as I was thinking ahead to this conversation was the movement from striving into presence, and how can people move from striving, proven, performing into a more grounded place of present self-trust and authentic expression? Can heart goals still be practical and action orientated with this?
Gosh, yes, because I think from if something is energizing and thrilling and aligned with who you are and is resonating with you and is also realistic, there's a natural productivity that comes with that. For me, it also links with inspiration. It's inspired action as opposed to chore. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't things that we have to do, because it's part of life and it's responsibility. It's a chore to empty the dishwasher or to make this or to put the clothes out of the clothesline or whatever. There are still things that we have to do. But if we're looking at areas where we're looking to create something new or to build something, I don't want that to come from a place of being a chore or from being low down on the emotional scale, because it will be counterproductive. It ain't going to achieve anything because the energy is not right. It's not aligned. It's swimming upstream. I'm looking for the actions that I'm taking in those areas to feel inspired, and then it's swimming downstream. I'm reminded again of the Abraham Hicks quote of, whatever you're working towards, if you're looking to make toast, just make sure the toaster is plugged in first. It's like, am I plugged in? Otherwise, all the striving will be like gears that can't gain traction. And I know that because I've experienced it for sure. It only leads to burnout. But at the same time, we acknowledge, Krystal, that we always do our best, that we're all perfectly ourselves, but we're all also works in progress, so that I'm looking to maybe have greater awareness around what it is I'm doing. It's a bit like, what's that phrase we hear of nowadays? Like metacognition, where we're thinking about our thinking. Yeah. And if I can get into that space where I can witness my own thoughts, and it's a bit like, you move up to the floodlights or the spotlights and you see the drama playing out on the stage down below you. It's like, if I can witness myself in patterns, good, bad, or ugly, I have then greater awareness and greater choice over how I can interact. But that's a constant practice. I think that's why we have the phrase, say, a spiritual practice or a yoga practice. It is a meditation practice. It is practice. There is no one and done scenario. And as you can probably tell, this is an area that I'm very passionate in, but I'm sort of my own first student with it. It's like, what works for me and what doesn't. And so often I have to remind myself of going back to some of the basics.
For people listening in who might be realizing that they've been pursuing goals that don't actually feel true for them anymore, what would be a compassionate first step to move towards kind of finding a way back to alignment?
Yeah, I mean, they're big questions, Krystal, and there is no one piece of tea-towel wisdom for it. What I would always say is that sort of question itself is the key. If you're asking that question, answers will follow when we're open and we're listening. But again, it goes back to something that I do with practically every one-to-one coaching client I work with, especially those in the area of career fulfillment or broader goals. And I'd say to them, let's take a moment and give ourselves a heart, back to the word heart again, a heart high five. The way if you do a high five, you're hitting someone like this and you're slapping hands. Can we give ourselves a heart high five? So we open our hands and we place it on our heart. And we take a few moments to breathe a bit more purposefully. And we tune in, because only the person asking that question can answer it for themselves. And can I tune in? And maybe I ask myself, okay, well, what do I need right now? Or, what does my heart want to say to me? Because I'm now listening. We have to remember that the ego will shout loudly, just like those egoic voices in the world with their megaphones, they shout loudly. The heart and wisdom will whisper, and we will only hear it when we're a little bit still and a little bit quiet. And that giving ourselves a heart high five, and it's like, okay, what do I need right now? Or I'm here, I'm listening. That will be the best wisdom, because it's unique for you. It's coming from you. Better than anything I could say. That's what I've been going back to myself again and again in recent times. And they're always what I would call gems of wisdom. But again, it's back to practicing, because we have to practice it a little and practice to hear. And it's not like we're going to be, Elizabeth Gilbert and Eat, Pray, Love. We're going to have this booming voice to say, go back to bed, although it might. It can be very subtle. It can be very subtle. And sometimes it's just a longer exhale, where the parasympathetic nervous system has kicked in and we maybe acknowledge to ourselves that we're doing our best. That's noble work.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it's kind of the point of a well-being practice as well, because you're sitting there, you're reflecting, you're being compassionate, you're bringing about self-awareness into the fore as well, really reflecting on where you're at right now.
Yes, and sometimes journaling helps with that as well. Get it out of your head and see it on a page, because most of our heads are full of stuff, and it's nice to get it out. Ink it, don't think it, as I always say. See it on the page in front of you. That's something that I've been doing for decades, is journaling, not necessarily to go back and reread it, but just to get another perspective on it. It helps with that witnessing piece, Krystal. Like, we're not in the drama, we can now observe it a little bit more. And after a while, that just helps us connect with a greater sense of stillness. And that stillness is not an inactive state. I always think that inner stillness or peace is a very resourced state. And going back to what you had said a little while ago, from that resourced state, actions will naturally follow. Inspired action will naturally follow. We'll have the ideas and the prompts to do things, which will, again, feel as if it's come from the inside out.
And James, what are some of your go-to well-being practices?
In addition to everything that I've mentioned with those 4 hours and whatever, very simple. And of course, the less screen and no green. It's probably 11 months of the year, but first thing in the morning, I go to the local park with the dogs. That is ticking so many boxes for me. Yes, it's physical health. Yes, it's the dogs getting walked, but it's also my own mental health and well-being as well. That is something I love. It would need to be raining heavily before I discard that. I've also had a yoga practice now for 8-9 years. That's a class I do every Tuesday, and I love it. I love it. They're probably my 2 main courses when it comes to the well-being menu. There are other things in there. Sometimes it's purposeful breathing. It might be the Wim Hof breathing. There's journaling. Maybe it's morning pages. There's other stuff that I will go to at different times. But the regular ones are the morning walk and the yoga practice.
When you're so consistent with those, and when there comes a day when you don't do them, you feel the difference?
Yes, I do. Sometimes things will happen and I can go a few days without it, and then I will feel off kilter. I'll feel out of balance, because they're restorative practices for me. I can get away with the odd day here and there, but if it's a period of time without those, it doesn't serve me. And that's not saying, going through the laps of the park or doing the yoga to achieve something. Showing up for them is the fulfillment in itself, because if we turn the word around again, fulfillment, filled full of what? Well, filled full of what makes me feel good. That is how I would view fulfillment. And maybe that brings us full circle, Krystal.
It does indeed. We are beginning to close, James, but I'd just like to ask you for one final reflection. If listeners were to take away one key message from this conversation, what would you most hope it would be?
Gosh, my gut response to that is, because I know this from years of talks and workshops, I will always be surprised at what people will take from a conversation, because they will hear it with their own ears and digest it with their own heart. So someone can take something from our chat that maybe was just something that flew out the side of my mouth or your mouth. You may not even recognize it. But if I was to think of maybe one overriding thing, and it often is, I've alluded to it in some shape or format around, how we're always doing our best and we're all perfectly ourselves, and yet we're also works in progress. That's always a message that I would emphasize. And if someone has picked up something beneficial from our chat today, wonderful. But the most meaningful wisdom will come when you tune into yourself. And if today's chat was a reminder to do that and to give yourself a heart high five, that's a nice thing to take away.
Oh, so James, thank you so much. I like that, the heart high five. For me, this has been a rich, grounding and genuinely nourishing conversation. These are the conversations I enjoy having. really, what I'm really taking from this is the invitation to move from pressure into presence,
Mm,
from proven into authenticity, and from goals that simply keep us busy into goals and ways of living that
yeah.
actually support more fulfillment, alignment, and well-being. Thank you for always for the work that you do and for your friendship, your wisdom, warmth, and honesty to the podcast today. And thank you so much to those listening to the Empowered Self podcast today. And if something in today's conversation resonated with you, do not keep it to yourself, share it. Send this episode to a friend, someone who might need it, or someone who's quietly rethinking what really matters in their life right now. And if anything in our conversation with myself and James spoke to you, please do follow the podcast, subscribe, leave a review, or you can contact James as well on jamessweetman.com. I will put the links to James' podcast as well in the show notes so you can pick up on some more wonderful insights from James there as well. And do join us this Sunday for another Sunday Reset Ritual where we'll take a few gentle moments together to pause and, as James said in our conversation as well, to look at kind of more of the well-being practices that we need to keep that balance and alignment in our life as well. And an opportunity to come back to yourselves before the week ahead. So thanks again, James. Such an honour to have you on, and I really do appreciate the work that you do and
Oh,
the work you
gosh.
continue
You're
to do.
very Thank you. Thank you, Krystal. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this chat.
And thank you again for your time. And until next time, to all of you, take gentle care of yourself. And I see you for another episode.